Good morning to each and every one of you. Thank you and welcome to Mankato, Minnesota. Just like the Bahamas, just a little different, I think. And so we're glad to have you here, and we're glad that you braved what is soon to be, sounds like a little bit of snow accumulation. So thank you. My name is Brett Kaysen. I have the honor to moderate the sustainability panel today for you. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a run of show here as we work through the event. We will start out with this tremendous panel that Minnesota Pork has assembled and do some quick introductions. And then we'll move into some Q&A. And we'll leave enough time for what I would hope is a robust conversation from you and the crowd to ask the questions that you have. Because I think it's important, since you've made time and effort and energy to be here in the room today, that we address any comments, questions, concerns, or additional clarity that you may seek around what is a popular and sometimes confusing but exciting topic called sustainability. For those of you pig farmers in the room, I'd like to start this way and say thank you for what you do. I really appreciate what you do and who you are. For those of you that are in allied industry and support those pig farmers, thank you for what you do as well. And sometimes we come to these meetings, we come to these events, we get excited to see our friends, but at our core, we are a pig farming community that's passionate about what we do and do things for the right reasons, and for that we're thankful. So with that being said, we've got one mic that we'll share amongst the panelists. We've assembled a fantastic group of folks here with various backgrounds and different representations from association work, from producers all the way to the further end product in the supply chain. So Dr. Crawford, we'll start with you. I'd like each one of you as panelists to start out with who you are, what organization you represent, and of the importance of why you're on the panel today. So who you are, what organization you represent, and the importance to you why you're on the panel. So Dr. Crawford, we'll start with you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody. And so I'm Sara Crawford. I'm the president of Sustainable Environmental Consultants. So the importance and the reason that I'm on the panel today is my team at SEC, as we can use that term today, I think, to make it easier. We create these reports for you as producers. And so we'll talk about that program more today. But our company helps you understand what's happening on your farm, but we're not tied to any inputs. So we don't sell feed, we don't sell pharmaceuticals or anything, but we're also not tied to anything like a carbon market. So we just sit in this nice neutral space where we want to help you understand what's happening on your farm. And we've been working with Pork Board for 4 years now on this project and working in this space. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Servick. I am the Director of Marketing and Public Policy for Minnesota Pork Producers Association, but I also work on our sustainability work. And so the report that Sara just talked about, Minnesota was an early adopter and partner with the National Pork Board on this work, and I think that's a little bit of a factor of the environment in which farms operate in Minnesota. It's an important discussion and topic when we're talking about environmental impacts and how our farms can operate here with the regulatory environment, but also that storytelling about how we can use this information in lots of different places. Take real farmers' data, a real snapshot of what they're doing, the practices and things that they use. How can we turn that into information that's usable, that we can help both the consumers, those in more influential positions in public policy, understand what farms are doing, but then also try to go on the offense a little bit and help shape the conversation around sustainability for pork, the product, what it means for a pig farmer in Minnesota, and how we can really help take that story using real farmers' data and go forward with it in a hopefully productive way for the farmer that also at the end protects their permission to operate their businesses the way that they know best.
Great, thank you. Good morning, Jeff Edwards. I'm a quality systems manager in our U.S. supply chain group at McDonald's. So I've been with McDonald's now for 10 years. And I have responsibility for the beef and pork categories. Today, I'm going to help provide perspective from the end consumer viewpoint, and then hopefully talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at McDonald's.
Thank you. I'm Kevin Hugoson, pork producer from Fairmont, Minnesota. I have a family operation called Hugoson Pork. My wife and I have our 2 children and a son-in-law involved in the operation. And Lauren came to us kind of when just started talking about sustainability, and we decided to do an improvement plan that Sara just talked about. And Lauren pretty much covered everything that I was going to say, so well, I don't need to say it, but reason we did it is, we were curious about what this would look like. We do a lot of corn on corn, and still need tillage, haul out a lot of manure on the ground, and so just kind of curious, where we're going to be at. Do we need to have a cover crop? Do we need to totally change the way we do our grain farming operation? But it's really good to know where we stand, what it looks like. It was a lot more encouraging than I thought. I thought we'd have to make some potential major changes down the road, but and we're still learning. And later I can explain a few more things that we're doing to try to improve the sustainability that we have.
Hey, I'm Leif Fixen. I'm with the Nature Conservancy, TNC, and I'm part of our North America Ag team. And for those of you who don't know what TNC is, we originally got our start as a land conservancy, so native prairies, old growth forests, stuff like that, trying to protect those. But about 20 years ago, we launched an ag program, and the primary goal of that ag program is to work with ag to ultimately reduce its impact on the environment, but also make sure we have an ag industry to provide food and fiber for our world. And so the main kind of focus of the program is how do we accelerate the adoption of conservation practices. So big focus on precision nutrient management, big focus on regenerative ag practices, including soil health stuff, so reduced tillage, cover crops. And then the other kind of big category of work that we're focused on is edge of field. So making sure that once some nutrients do go mobile, or we have a big rainstorm and there's a bunch of water going down the river, how do we kind of tie up a lot of that? So grass waterways, wetlands, working buffers, stuff like that.
Okay, thanks to each and every one of you, and hopefully those of you in the crowd can see and understand the talent that you have before you, and so listen in and ask questions here as we move forward. I'll get us kicked off, Kevin, and you're going to start us off today because you're the star of the show, being the pig farmer on the panel. And I think about all the things, I've been to your farm, Kevin, and I think about all the things that you have to manage on a day-to-day basis. You got a lot coming at you, and then you compile environmental effect like we're going to have here over the next 72 hours. And I want you to articulate to the group that's assembled here today and say, why is this Pork Cares Farm Impact Report so important? Of all the time that you spend, of all the things you have to do, you took additional time to lean into the report. I think for 2 years now, you're working on your second report, if I remember right. Why is that so important to you? It's a voluntary initiative. You had to take additional time to do it, and energy and data collection. Tell me about the why and why you're so passionate about completing the report.
Well, I think, first of all, just to know where we stood. As a pork producer or a grain farmer, you're hesitant to let information out, or am I going to have to comply some way? It's going to be difficult for me, or is it going to cost a bunch of extra money? So I think that was one thing, just to know where we stood. I am blessed. We have our son-in-law, Cody Toothaker, is an agronomist, so that helped out too to compile stuff. But just he had a huge interest in that too, just from his position on our farm. And I think a lot of times as pork producers, we maybe haven't been on the offense; we're always on the defense. And I just feel it's important that we're out there knowing what's going on. You can agree or disagree with sustainability, but for now, it's real. And I guess we thought it was important to have a benchmark out there to see where we were at. Definitely changes that we made, and just like your water meters, how much water are you consuming? Electricity. On our Fairwind site, we went from doing a lot of heat lamps to putting in a heat mat to cut our electricity costs in half on the sow farm. And so easy things like that could be done without affecting us, actually making us probably a better producer out of that. And because we don't know if someday maybe they'll sell, we will sell our credits, and so just to be ahead of that and be ready for that. I can't predict a lot of things, but we just felt it was important to be ready for that and just see how important putting on manure is compared to commercial fertilizer. We've known that, but now we got data to back that up to share that with the consumer out there. And I think, too, the consumer is just so much more concerned about where that pork comes from, what it looks like, the effects it had on our environment, and I think we got a great story to tell.
Thank you, Kevin. And before I forget and we move on, I do want to point your attention. There's a table over here towards the back of the room. When we talk about these farm impact reports, you have the opportunity to be involved in that as funded on behalf of your checkoff dollars. So I'd encourage you to take one of those tear cards, fill out that information. Don't just leave it on the table. I would encourage you to take it to the National Pork Board booth and turn that into the wonderful folks that are manning that booth so you can be a part of the program. So Kevin, you talked about you think the consumer cares about this work that you're doing on the farm. You articulated that clearly to the audience. And so, Jeff, if you'll lean into this portion and say, well, you just heard the farmer's voice that he thinks, although he's somewhat removed from the end user of the product, that this data matters to consumers. You feed, and you'll be able to quote this number, multi-million number probably across the world of folks pork every day. Is Kevin right? Does the consumer really care about these things relative to what he's doing on his farm as he ties it to sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the consumer is really focused on where their food comes from. They want to feel good about the food that they eat. Sustainability and social responsibility are no longer buzzwords. I mean, there are numerous studies that have happened. It's gone from, if you look at the stages of maturity, it's no longer in this germination stage. We're moving towards being a mature stage with sustainability. So, when you look at how things are being farmed and how we're doing them responsibly, it's so important to tell that story to the consumer, because if not, they're going to make up their mind on their own based off of social media or what they're hearing from other organizations. So it's really important to be armed with that information, to talk to them. So anytime we engage with shareholders, stakeholders, consumers, anytime we can point to information that's industry driven versus just McDonald's, gives us a lot of credibility.
Thank you, Jeff, and I'll leave the mic in your hands. You're dead center on the hot seat, and so I can just imagine some of the pig farmers out in the crowd saying, well, thank you, Jeff, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that the consumer is interested. But knowing this group like I know it, they're probably also thinking, but how do I get paid, right? So you're asking for additional information, you want additional data, you want your consumers to feel really good about the pork, in this case, that they're consuming. But I'm thinking the producers are probably thinking, what's the business case? So unpack that for us in terms of as you view, as you were on a farm in Minnesota a couple months ago with me, how do you view the business case from a farmer perspective relative to McDonald's lens?
Yeah, so I would say that, so first of all, from how we get paid, McDonald's has been paying a premium for group house pork since in 2012 is whenever we publicly announced it. And then in about 2015 is when we really started to scale up. So we understand that it takes a certain amount of capital investment on your end to make some of these changes. We did not want it to be something that was a big hurdle to the business. We didn't come up with our McDonald's individual standards. We follow AASV's definition of group housing. And so, I just think as we look at the industry as a whole, and you look at consumers and how they're wanting to know more about the food, more and more of the product, right, is turning that way. So, we were talking about GHGs, right? And if you look at the total GDP, I want to say it's like 60% of the total global GDP is tied into some sort of sustainability commitment by the year 2030. So the industry, the food industry is moving that way. So I think it would behoove you as a producer to at least think about it and look into it, because more and more customers are coming that way. And one thing that we've struggled with was finding that supply. So we've started to invest in supply chains that have resiliency. McDonald's has always partnered with industry. We make investments, and sometimes those supply chains end up being sort of in their own bubble, meaning if we want to get all of that supply, we're going to go after it and contract, and that's going to be our supply chain. So, I think as the industry continues to further drive group house pork, and the industry being food service, quick service, and retail, I think that's that's going to be the raw material that we're going to be preferring, and that's what we're going to be sourcing.
Thank you for that. And so what I heard in that discussion is it is really a marketplace play for the future. And if you're not in this game, they may choose another protein.
Absolutely.
And may move away from pork. And so I think that's something for us to always remember and keep in mind, is that the consumer in the end and the eater has choices in protein. And one of our things is that we need to continue to make sure that pork is relevant and credible in their mind as they enjoy the product and our opportunity to maintain or grow the business. Jeff, you mentioned greenhouse gas emissions. You used the word, or the acronym GHG. Dr. Crawford, I'm going to let you take this one. A lot of talk about greenhouse gas emissions. Walmart really started the trend with their gigaton initiative, their initiative to take a gigaton of CO2 equivalent out of the atmosphere. I've never been able to figure out what a gigaton of CO2 equivalent looks like. So in this, what I call the wild, wild west of greenhouse gas emissions, how does the work that Sustainable Environmental Consultants make this really complex GHG accounting methodologies simple for the producer, and why does that matter?
Yeah, it is complex, absolutely. And there are different models out there, and we're learning more. And so a lot of times people might think, well, yeah, but it's not a perfect model yet. It's not a perfect equation yet. So should I even start? Why don't we wait? Why don't we wait until that equation's even better? But the thing is, we all need to have data into that system, as Dr. Kaysen was talking about, so that we can continue to improve it. And like Kevin was saying, to be on the front foot here. So as we look at the different, as I think about them, equations or accounting for greenhouse gas emissions, there are some different methods, but the USDA does have an accounting method that's called Comet Farm Tool. And so that is available for people to use, and so you can think about it's independent, it's neutral for you, and that's the main tool that we're using for this project that we're talking about with pork. And so what they're doing is using the information there, but we can stand behind what that looks like. We can stand behind that for you as producers and say, let's talk to you about this equation. Let's talk to you about what goes into it. And it's not a black box, right? So what we're doing as Sustainable Environmental Consultants is working to make it as easy for you as possible as producers, because we know there is a lot to it. There's a lot of, well, what about this? And what about that? And how is this measured? And what about my manure? And what if I change a feed stuff? And so our goal is to take that, we can put this into the equation or into the model and say, yep, this is how it improves, or this is what you could change to make an improvement at your operation. So as I think about it, yeah, there is a lot of complicated math and science there, but that's really behind the scenes. And we have the scientists on staff to work with that, so that what we can do for you as producers is really make it as simple as possible, and to understand that where it's just saying, okay, this is what this means to me, and this is what I can do within my operation. Like Kevin was talking about, these are the changes I can make. So you do not have to be the specialist in this area. You do not have to know every equation and what it means, but know that that we're doing that, and we're staying up on the science and what's out there.
Thank you, Sarah. And then a follow-up question, and I think about, again, the business case for a producer. If they were to go through this process, partnered with Minnesota Pork and Sustainable Environmental Consultants, they get their report, they understand their CO2 equivalents, their GHG emissions. If they wanted to have a business proposal with said entity that wanted to buy those carbon credits, does this model verify that to where they can make a business transaction?
Yeah, so carbon credits is the next step, I would say. So what we do as Sustainable Environmental Consultants is called measure, report, and then verify your data. But what that means is we're measuring it, and again, in that independent way. Now, there are lots of different carbon markets, and so you may have heard of a number of them. So there are a number of different carbon markets. What you can do is take the information and learn, okay, what does this specific carbon market require? Because carbon market A, carbon market B, carbon market C, they could all have different requirements. But the data that you're going to get on this report can stand up to that if those are the measures that they're looking for. And we can also help you if you're saying, gosh, I don't know how does this work within that carbon market? How does that go to that? We can help you with that transition to talk to that carbon market. So we're not we're not affiliated with any carbon market. We're not a carbon market, but we can also talk to you about the different carbon markets if you have questions, and then how they have each their own verification step and what they would consider, but we can help you understand what those are and how the data that we provide you, how that matters and how you can meet the carbon market's needs. But another point to your business case discussion is, yes, carbon markets, folks, that is an area where you can go with this data, but there's also other ways that you can utilize the data, like talking to your lender, talking to your insurance, talking to, maybe it's to your packer or wherever you're sending, contracting hogs through. So there are more ways than just a carbon market. Using it for NRCS. We have the Climate Smart grants coming up, and I don't want to go off on a rabbit trail too much, but there are other ways that this data can be utilized more than just looking to sell credits to a carbon market.
Excellent point, Sarah. Thank you. And sometimes I think we get so focused on the money, we lose sight of the bigger picture opportunities. And so, Leif, I'm going to come to you next, and because it's easier to make them pass the mic all the way down as opposed to go to Lauren. You have worked with Minnesota Pork in this space. You've been a great collaborator. I've always identified the Nature Conservancy as what I call a reasonable, non-governmental organization. You're welcome, and let's make sure we keep it that way, okay? So you've seen the data set, you've seen some of these reports, work with Minnesota Pork. How does that help you, right, as a leader in the NGO space? I'm going to go back and use the words you used in your introduction. Continue to protect agriculture and make sure it's around for generations to come. So give some tangible examples how you as TNC use this data to the advantage of the pig farmer.
Oh, geez. That's a big question. So
that's why I asked it.
Yeah. So we're a science-based organization. About a quarter of our staff are PhD researchers engaging with, a lot of the folks on this stage and in this room and in the, trade show. And so, one of our big goals is, and I think this is the reason why we're viewed as a practical NGO, environmental group, conservation group, is that, we follow the science and we follow kind of the evidence, right? What's actually happening once we take some of this stuff to the field. And so, what does that mean, and why do we work with pork or livestock or ag or, McDonald's? It all ties back to this has to scale, and I'm getting lost in my train of thought here a little bit, but, we need to make informed decisions, both, as consumers, but also as policymakers. And the only way we're going to make informed decisions is if we have good information, right? And so the only way we get that is by working with farmers and working with food companies and working with researchers to dive into these issues, both the agronomic, so what's actually happening in the field, what's happening in the pig, and then, what's happening, I think, in the environment, right? And then kind of taking all that together and figuring out, okay, how do we actually, one, identify solutions that just make good sense for the environment and the farmer, and then identify, pathways for, and I'll pick on our edge of field strategy a little bit. Anytime we're taking acres out of production or talking about putting in a wetland, that's probably not going to have a strong ROI for the farm as a business. So then we take that information back, but it could have a really high ROI for the environment. So, with the knowledge that we've gained through working with all these partners, we then go and work through our public policy programs and identify farm bill programs or climate smart commodity projects, and kind of all this stuff, right? And we figure out ways that recognizes, that value to the environment in a way that the farmer can tap into it. So it might be a cost share incentive, it might be a water quality trading program, it might be a tax rebate, kind of all those things. So I don't know, is this okay? I'm doing good.
Yeah, let me recap some things I heard that you said that I really enjoyed, and I think the majority of the people in this room would agree. Follow the science.
Yeah.
And so never lose track of that. I know I'm the moderator, but I can't help but coach. Follow the science.
And
Go
that
ahead.
really allows us to have conversations with folks that might just paint a black and white picture of ag is the problem, right? It's like, well, actually, like, it's a shade of gray, and it also helps us have conversations with the pork industry or, like Corteva or whoever it is and says, well, this is the research that we're seeing. We can't ignore it here and then look at it there. We look at it across the board. So it helps us stand up good ideas, and it also helps us, have tough conversations with partners. So,
And that's fair. Thank you for that. Lauren, I'm going to come next to you because I think it segues perfect to your role and the work that you've done here in Minnesota. I'm going to recap a few things Leif said. Follow the science. Again, I'll continue to beat on that drum just because of my background, and that's what we should do, as opposed to following the sensationalism, which we can get lost in. But he also mentioned public policy programs. So when you introduced yourself to the crowd and you gave your title, share with these folks how you've utilized the partnership with TNC in a collaborative nature, but also the data relative to the public policies that we're challenged with here at a local state level in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's really been important, especially as we've seen some of these opportunities to, I'll use the word enhance some of the ways agriculture is talked about when we're looking at things like greenhouse gas emissions, protecting and improving soil health and water quality in Minnesota, something that's very near and dear to us as Minnesotans, but also in the policy arena. And this is where we've actually partnered all the agriculture groups with TNC really closely on some soil health grant programs right here within the state of Minnesota, really focusing at getting practices that we know can help make improvements. We understand they come with some barriers, be it cost, education, training, just the materials themselves to the farmer. So we've created a program at the Department of Agriculture to help funnel funds directly onto farms to get those practices on the ground. By using our tools that we have through the on-farm reports, we can then hopefully have a pathway to measure the impacts of those kinds of programs with that public investment, because there is public benefit when a farmer implements a practice like this. And so that's just one small example at the state level as far as public policy and funding. But then we've also seen some opportunity specifically with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to help engage in the conversations. I think for a long time, agriculture got off easy when we talked about continuous improvement. Farmers have always been really strong in that principle, and it's not that you weren't, it's now we have to have the proof that you were doing it, and that we can document over time if you do make incremental changes, what kind of benefits are you seeing, and that really can help then us take into those conversations with regulators or those who are looking to make policy. How can we improve those and actually accurately represent what is happening in Minnesota, and then also make it a business case for the farmer to see this is the right thing for me to do for my farm as a business. It's also got benefit to my community and our environment. And that's really where, by having data that we can track over time, we can go and find the policy, I'll call them ideas. Solutions is maybe a stretch sometimes, but find those things that we can use to help implement these practices, things we know that farmers can do, and ultimately have the kinds of effects that we want, both a healthy pig, a healthy community, and hopefully a healthy environment, so that the next generations of Hugosons can continue to do what they want to do and raise food.
Thank you, Lauren, for the tangible examples relative to policy. And so you're a storyteller. You're a communicator by training and I think passion. I want you to think about, as a leader of Minnesota Pork, think 2 to 3 years out. The data continues to come in. The data continues to aggregate and blind. What's your vision beyond the State House of how you could use this information? If I had a nickel being in the pig business for 49 years, for every time I heard we have to do a better job of telling our story, I'd be retired by now, right? And I've also heard from the stage today we need to be more proactive in our approach in communications, which I agree. So tell me about that. As the main communicator and thought leader for Minnesota in this space, how are you envisioning leveraging that data outside the state capitol?
Yeah, it's really important, and I think the data will be critical, and I think that's a lot of times the first step. I mean, Jeff talked about when you have the information that brings you credibility, whether you're a McDonald's or you're a Hugoson Pork. And so I think that's usually our foot in the door. And then how we talk about it is increasingly going to be what's important. Like Brett said, I always look at sustainability and policy through the lens of communications. How are we building the connection and helping people understand the impacts of what they're doing and how that impacts others, but then also why is that relevant? Why does that warrant an investment in public dollars? And so I think there's a really good opportunity for the pig farmers in Minnesota in the next 2 to 3 years and this isn't just because I really want you in the sustainability report, but our goal is to get to 51% of the pigs, because I would love to have a report that I can take to a legislator, to a public policy peer of mine, or even to one of our regulatory agencies and say, this is what Minnesota's pig farmers are doing. We know this. This is their data, their information. How can we work together to improve this? And so that the farms in Minnesota, if they would like to continue here, they can do that and make it a pathway that our environmental permitting makes sense and is representative and looks at the actual true risks and opportunities related to building or changing up a farm, creating opportunities for the next generation. I think these are the kinds of tools that we're going to need to have to build those connections and tell those stories in the places where they're going to matter. And I think we have a really good opportunity, because this isn't just a large state model, which is what's used primarily right now for greenhouse gas accounting, of which you're getting zero carbon credit sequestration. Zero. Our reports will show that that's not the case, because those are real farmers' data at a year at a time using their practices with their soils and their manure. So that's the kind of information and opportunity we have, both to help not just our regulators understand, but why Minnesotans should feel good about pig farmers being here and feeling good about the pork that they get to eat because it was raised here. And so that's a big opportunity. And I think that all comes together. The more we can get this information, like I said, 2 to 3 years, I'd love to have 8.5 million pigs represented. That would be about 51% of the pigs in Minnesota in this report, because I think it becomes really powerful when we can talk about the majority of pig farmers and pigs are being raised this way, and that's going to be really important.
Thank you, Lauren. Sounds like we got a lot of work to do. So as soon as the snow melts, we'll go get those extra recruits, right? Kevin, I want to bring it back to the farm, and I'm going to go back to some of the things you shared with the group earlier. You said, you know, part of the reason we leaned into this report is to figure out where we were. But you also said part of it was to take credit for what we've done. And your quote was, actually, the data came back more positive than I expected. So there was something in your mind as you went into the report, right? Saying, okay, I want to figure out where I'm at. You use the word benchmarking. We in the pig industry do this all the time. We're big data analysts. But as you got the report back and you said it had better outcomes than you would have expected, what were those better outcomes as you read through the 2-page report than what you had expected? Share with the crowd mentally what you were going through during that piece of information you got back.
What I mentioned earlier is that we do a lot of corn-on-corn operation because we need the corn for obviously the pig farm. And so I was concerned that, we'd probably have to maybe do no-till, have to have a cover crop, and maybe even, go back to more of a 50-50 type rotation situation. So that was kind of spinning through my mind a lot. And so then to come to find out that like I mentioned, the manure has so much value to it, and it's so good for the environment. Instead of getting commercial fertilizer that comes from Russia or Canada that's shipped over here and then trucked in or railed in, the cost and all the emissions are so much less by using our manure in that situation. And then just we were guilty years ago when you did corn on corn. What'd you do? You moldboard plowed it because you had to get black enough. And now with how we inject our manure and use a minimum tillage in the fall, we are doing a lot better of getting cover on the ground, less black dirt, and probably by about Friday morning we'll know what black dirt blowing potentially could look like again after the storm comes through. But and then our next thing is that I know there's some producers in Minnesota that have done cover crops and have had some luck with that, and so that's something we got to be checking into. Our trouble is a lot of times we're hauling manure till November 15th, and we know what the ground temperature is on November 15th, so not much of anything grows for a cover crop. So those are probably some things we got to work on. And fortunately, too, where we live, it's fairly flat, so we don't have to worry a lot about erosion from water or the terrain. That's helped us out. But I felt confident that, boy, I don't feel like I got to hide now the information we have. We can be transparent. We can share that with McDonald's. We can share that with the consumer or whoever it might be. That we got a good story to tell and keep after it.
Kevin, would it be fair to say that U.S. pig farmers have been doing a lot right for a long time, and that potentially this document just proves that that's the case with data and analytics? Is that a fair analysis?
Amen. We do. Sometimes we feel like we get put down, that we're not doing anything right, but we're doing a bunch of things right already. We've injected manure forever. We've been ahead of that, and so yeah, we're doing a good job. And we got a great staff at Minnesota Pork to help push us and keep us on the cutting edge, and so we're thankful for that.
Thank you, Kevin. Leif, I'm going to come next to you. We don't talk about this wonderful thing called black gold. Kevin talked about it. It's not oil, it's pig manure, okay? And so tell us about that through your eyes as the Nature Conservancy when you think about, you mentioned earlier, nutrients. It's important to you and your organization that we keep nutrients in place, whether regular weather patterns or in a rain event. Talk to us about your view when you start to think about the utilization of pig manure in the soils of Minnesota and the advantage that it has relative to maybe some of the other sources that are available. Tell us more about that. What's your view from an NGO perspective?
I mean, so manure, I think, when properly utilized and managed, is a wonderful resource. And for all those of you on the checkoff boards, I think it should be considered a value-added product of the pork industry, because it helps in so many different ways, from an organic matter standpoint to, just cycling nutrients back onto the landscape. The challenge we have is that it's, for the most part, a fixed type soil amendment, right? So I think embracing some of the new technologies that are coming out, whether it's some of the new variable rate, sensors that allow you to put a prescribed application of manure down and then coming in and doing kind of a fine tune with a conventional fertilizer, or some of the nutrient recovery technologies, stuff like that really help us bring the precision nutrient management lens to the utilization of manure. There's a lot of challenges to that. Storage and, timing, which ties back to storage, to placement, which, okay, how do we recognize the impacts of tillage as it relates to greenhouse gas, but also, the fact that we need to incorporate manure from a water quality standpoint and a greenhouse gas standpoint. So, I mean, it gets to be a more complicated scenario, right? But I think there are solutions out there that allow us to better and fully utilize the manure that we have in our livestock system, which allows us to then ultimately reduce the amount of fertilizers that are needing to be manufactured. So,
Well said. Dr. Crawford, I'm going to let you take it from here. Back to Leif's comments about, hey, we got to talk about manure storage, we got to talk about tillage, we've got to talk about manure management relative to greenhouse gas emissions. I know the two biggest imprints of GHG from a pound of pork produced are the row crop in which the pig eats and the manure in which it produces. So tell me about your tool, these reports. How are you highlighting, celebrating, demonstrating the success of manure? Walk us through that and what the report does for a farmer.
Yeah, great, thank you. And there are example reports on this table, but at the Minnesota Pork booth, there is this actual report of the farms that are in the Minnesota project right now. So this is real data. So something that Lauren mentioned when she introduced herself is about getting the actual data, or the real data from on farms. And so that's a big difference for us at Sustainable Environmental Consultants to some others. Is we're not looking at this on a county level. We're not looking at this just with a satellite and saying what's happening here. We're getting information from your farm. So to Kevin's, like if we're working with Kevin, how many tillage passes? What are your application rates? What are your yields? There's these different questions, and that helps us get to the personal level, field by field analysis. So it's not just looking at an average. It's not just looking at, gosh, what's happening in this county? Nope, it's looking at what you're doing field by field, and we're going to map those boundaries. We're going to look at your waterways. We're going to look at all those items and better understand that with you. And the ways to celebrate that when thinking about manure, because manure does play such a big part in the carbon footprint, or GHG footprint. And to the points made earlier, it's really great for soil. We know that. And it's really great for erosion and decreasing erosion, keeping soil in place, keeping water in the soil, all of those things. And what we can do, on the back of this report is showing the percentage of those acres in the in the project that are receiving manure and showing also the value of that. So to your point about the business case, yes, there's this absolute great portion of it that is looking at, okay, what is it for soil health as we're looking at all these items, but also what's the big business case for you to use that, especially with fertilizer prices increasing. And so we really want to make sure to highlight that and show this is the importance of that. And at the bottom, it shows you the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus saved by using fertilizer on the fields. And again, that's real data. To Lauren's point, this is actually what's happening in Minnesota. So it's super powerful. And then you would get the same report for your own operation. The other thing that I think is really important is if you look at the farms that we've worked with already, and it's on the back here, to Kevin's point, it can be scary, folks, right? What's this data going to say? I don't know maybe a lot about greenhouse gas emissions. The farms in this data set are already greenhouse gas emission negative. So when they say, to your point, Leif, oh, ag's the problem, here's the issue. No, let's have a conversation because we're already sequestering carbon. We're already putting in the ground. And so if Lauren can go and talk to Pollution Control Agency and say, actually, the data shows we are sequestering carbon. And then, for instance, the soil erosion rate nationally is 4.6 tons per acre. The farms in this data set are 0.64 tons per acre. This is a fantastic story to tell. And so that's where getting that and really glorifying that and showing this is actually what's happening is really important. And then what you'll also see on this report is it translates those measures into things people can more easily understand. Like the carbon, because of the carbon saved or reduced, it's like taking 3,570 passenger cars off the road annually. So again, and then you get that for your farm. So you can really start to understand what that means for you and your operation. So it's really trying to take these numbers that can be fuzzy or really big and quantify it and show the great work that's being done.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And I can tell you, you've spoke to Minnesota. I've had the opportunity to look at the aggregated data nationally, and here's the words I like to use. Pig farming is actually climate positive.
Right.
I'm going to say it again. Pig farming is actually climate positive. And the data that's real science, that's third-party audited and validated, proves that that's the case.
Correct.
Now, it's much more powerful, Leif, if I can use some of your words, that if we can scale this information. So yes, we've got multiple millions of pigs in the data set today. Yes, we've got 100,000 of acres, but I think as Lauren, you get the microphone, or Leif, it doesn't matter, you guys move it around. Leif, I want to ask you then, what does scale look like? You heard Lauren's dream of 51% of the pigs in Minnesota. And just focus on Minnesota. You challenge us to scale. Tell us what that scale means for your organizations and how you can be a zealous advocate for pork once we hit scale. Because it's all about you right now because you got the microphone. But I'm also about tangible examples, goals, and metrics. So what's scale mean to you?
Yeah, so I mean that there are these great examples of how, you know, an egg system can be very good for the environment, you know, while we produce food. And so how do we get the majority to be, you know, in this report, right? And so that's really where we focus, right? Like, you know, what are those barriers to getting the masses, to getting that 51% of farmers doing, you know, injection and thinking about reduced tillage and cover crops and precision nutrient management and all these other things. And so we're working on a lot of different fronts that all have the scalability lens kind of applied to them. And here in Minnesota, you know, I would say a couple of them. You already heard about one, the soil health legislation. You know, a great example, right? So that includes a whole bunch of different things, but one of the simplest things is equipment cost share. So if you're willing to buy a strip till toolbar that you can inject your manure with, right? They'll pay, I think it's up to $50,000 and 50%. The legislature only put $500,000 in it. Signups aren't due until mid-March, and they already have $1 million worth of equipment like signed up for that program. So I think, you know, that's a tangible program that everybody in this room can advocate for. You know, another example of how we scale and then also dive into the economics and the science is, you know, we've got a pilot in Minnesota, testing out one of these carbon platforms. We're working with the Ecosystem Service Market Consortium, but that's a partnership between the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, MDA, and then we brought some corporates to the table, Hormel being a one I'm sure you guys are aware of, Target and General Mills. And one of the deliverables called out in that project is, what is the amplifying effect of well-managed manure in a cropping system? So, we know a lot. We need to know more, especially as these programs scale. And so this is my call to all of you, make sure you follow Kevin's lead and engage in some of these programs, whether it's, our pilot or the sustainability assessment or any of these other things, because ultimately they're not perfect right now. They do need to get better. And as we get more farmers in these programs, they're going to get better because there's going to be better information. So,
Thank you for that. So Jeff, I'm going to come to you and let's go back to the farm. You and I had the opportunity to spend a few days together in New Holland, Michigan several months ago. And I can't remember if that was your first time on farm or if you'd been through a couple prior to that.
That was my first time.
First time, okay. So share with the crowd, we bring you to New Holland, Michigan, and we spent 2 days together. You had a vision before you went on farm and into the farm of what it is, could be, or should be. You come off the farm, we spend a half a day with each other again the next morning in the office. Tell us about your vision going in, and then your vision as you toured the facility and worked with the farmers and others that day, and as you made your way back home. What did that look like? Walk us through that as what you went through, I guess, mentally and emotionally as you were working through the farm prior and after.
Sure. So I think, sometimes, I have an ag background. I've managed other proteins, so no stranger there. But I hadn't been to a hog production or pork facility. So just the scale at which things were being done was quite incredible. You guys talked about manure and just innovation. Farmers are probably some of the most innovative people I've ever met, and that was definitely true with this visit. So, they were capturing manure, pumping it to different fields, and I think a lot of that obviously came out of being a business decision, but it also had benefits from sustainability. And so I had not seen the We Care program, and I had actually not been officially in this position yet. So it was all quite new, but I was quite impressed with all the work that the industry is doing and how you guys are trying to further on this cause.
Jeff, tell us more about the shareholder experience. A lot of us don't have the opportunity. Well, maybe there is. Hopefully, there's some stockholders here in the crowd that has McDonald's stock. But a lot of us don't have the opportunity as farmers to sit in those shareholder meetings. Give us a look inside. Tell us about the pressures that you face as a brand from folks that maybe don't appreciate what we do, whether it be in Minnesota or New Holland, Michigan, or across this great country. Tell us more about what that looks like and how this data set and this information could help you and your team as McDonald's.
Absolutely. So, our shareholders, it covers quite a big diversity of organizations, institutions, investment firms. We have NGOs. We have charitable organizations that are also involved. It's not just mom and pop investors. So every little organization has either their own goals, their own agenda maybe that they want to push forward. So having this first of all, having data to set a baseline and see and telling them we're improving as an industry, agriculture is improving, having that information to talk about the different principles, right, of the We Care program and the progress that's being made, just helps us to have really beneficial conversations, right? So they might come and say, well, McDonald's, you have a responsibility and from a scale to do the right thing for the communities, to do the right thing for the planet, to do the right thing for food safety and quality. And so being able to point to these different things and saying, yeah, actually, we do purchase responsibly. Here's what the industries are doing. Here's what the pork industry is doing. It kind of it helps settle that debate a lot sooner, and then sometimes we're able to educate, right? So they also might be shareholders in other companies. They might be wanting to, go and further their cause in those other shareholder meetings. So if we can educate them, I think it just benefits the industry as a whole.
Go ahead. Yep. Hat on, Leif.
I chewed on your question about what does it mean for scale at TNC, right? So I'd like to zoom out for a second, and I think there's maybe 4 components that we think about in our office. One is the practice has to make sense, so it needs to work. So that's where our science team comes in. It has to work economically. That's where the McDonald's comes in. That's where incentive programs come in. There needs to be a mechanism for spreading the word, and this is where your agronomists come in, your farmer advisor kind of network, your bankers come in, right? So we got to have that mechanism for spreading the word. This is where your fellow farmers, your neighbors who have been those early adopters, who have already learned some of these lessons as it relates to cover crops or reduced tillage, right? So how do we harness that already gained hard knock knowledge so that you don't have to make those same mistakes? And then ultimately we need a catalyst, some sort of motivator if we really want to accelerate the adoption of these practices at the rate that we need to adopt these practices, to address the climate issues and the water quality issues that we're facing right now. So that's again, incentive mechanisms, it's public policy, it's consumer demand signals, stuff like that. So that.
Yeah, thank you for those bullets. And when you're talking about practical and economical, you're talking to the right crowd today. And so thank you for being focused there. I'm going to ask you all the same closing question, and then we're going to move to the crowd for their questions and discussion. And Leif, we're going to start with you, and I'll modify the question a little bit as we work through the panel. But as you sit in your chair at TNC, Leif, how do you see the sustainability space, especially in your area of expertise? What does that look like 3 to 5 years down the road? Give us a peek around the corner of what you see from an NGO's perspective, what this space will look like relative to the pig farming community that's in front of you today.
So, from my seat, so for our North America Ag team, I handle what we call our farmer advisor strategy, right? And so zooming in kind of on that, my simple goal is that for any farmer who wants to try out a soil health or regenerative ag practice, they have available and easy access to both some expertise, so an agronomist or a neighbor, as well as some equipment that they can test out some of these practices at scale, right? So not the 15-foot wide no-till drill at your SWCD, but something that you're going to be able to cover 5,000 acres with, right? So, that's the base level kind of goal for me. As we dive more into the kind of the network of advisors you have, at minimum, when you go to ask them about some of these practices, I want those advisors to not say, oh, you don't want to do that, that's going to cause all kinds of headaches, right? But say, yeah, it's going to be challenging, but I can help you with that. In the best case scenario, they're bringing you some of these practices proactively because they too see this as the future of our ag, So I think that's me selfishly, specifically, from my chair. Ultimately, we just need to get this system rewarding, regenerative soil health, precision nutrient management type practices in our ag system. And that's kind of aligning our public policy, aligning markets, consumer demand and that expertise. So,
thank you. Kevin, I'm going to come back to you as the most important guy on the stage because what you do is what this is all about. I think about you from a lens of all the challenges that you face, whether it be foreign animal disease, some of the diseases that have been prevalent in this country forever that we continue to fight on a daily basis. I think about rising input costs and permitting and all the list of all the things, as my young daughters say. Talk to us about this sustainability work that you've started on. How do you envision incorporating this work, or how will this work impact your business as you look out 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think about it as myself, and I think a lot of the producers in this room, we're very competitive people, and we have to have a lot of endurance. That's like Brett was saying, we have challenges that never seem to end. You know, there's something new around the corner. You get one thing figured out, and there's the next thing. And you could look at maybe the sustainability thing as like, oh man, one more thing I got to do, or one more thing I got to try to prove about being a pork producer. But I think, you know, we just, we got to be good stewards. I guess that's one thing we try to preach in our operation, is that we're good stewards. And one thing we've been given is the land, the crops, the pigs, you know, to raise them. And I think we got to do the best we can. And even sometimes, you know, just to see something out there that I could improve on, I want to go get that. I'm gonna obtain that or get after it, just because, like I mentioned earlier, you know, I think I and the majority of the pork producers are very competitive people, and we want to prove to the consumer that we are doing a great job of raising pork, and that we got a great, like I mentioned earlier, a great story to tell. And hopefully, you know, in a greedy perspective, maybe there'll be some money that we get back someday. We got these credits, and you know, that'd be a caveat as a pork producer too, to be able, that'd be maybe the full circle to come around too. But just to keep improving and just doing a better job. And like from the data we've got, that we got a great story to tell already, and hopefully just make it better.
Thank you, Kevin and Jeff. Should be words of wisdom to your ears, right? When you hear Kevin talk about it's the right thing to do. It's part of our culture. It's ingrained in our business and our family. And oh, by the way, we're never satisfied. We're competitive, and we're trying to continuously improve. And so, Jeff, talk to us about the sustainability lens from McDonald's. You face a lot of pressures. Your organization faces a lot of pressures. You feed a lot of people every day in this world, and thank you for that. Just encourage you to continue to feed them more pork would be good, but we'll talk about that at the break.
We're trying.
Yeah, attaboy. Try harder. No, it's all good. Tell us about the future, right, from the leadership team meetings you get to sit in. And we had the Chief Sustainability Officer of Sustainability with us that day in New Holland, Michigan. What does this space look like for McDonald's, and can you tie it back to the pig farm over the next 3 to 5 years, please?
Sure. Yeah. So, you know, sustainability for McDonald's, it's a big umbrella, right? So food safety and quality is one of those umbrellas, animal health and welfare, and then community. So, you know, as we think about those three things and what that means to McDonald's, we try to align that with what it means to our consumer, but also what it means to industry. And so, you know, if you look at the next 3 to 5 years, you know, we've seen the pork category grow at McDonald's over the last 5 years. We anticipate that to continue to grow, and we've seen a lot of that growth internationally, right? So McDonald's is actually a net exporter of U.S. pork. So we are sending pork, whether it's, you know, raw material or finished product, we're sending that to other markets. So as some of those other markets start to, I guess, jumpstart their sustainability journey, and even as maybe it's legislative, maybe it's consumer driven, it's good to be able to have the data to talk to those other markets, right? So I'm only in the U.S. market, I'm only focused on the U.S. market, but when I talk to partners internally, it helps with that conversation of continuity of supply. So going back to the comment around leadership, I think our leadership is invested in understanding the supply chain all the way down to the farm level, right? I mean, we are 100% dependent on producers. I mean, if you guys aren't producing the food that we sell, we can't sell food to consumers. So we want to know more about what you guys are doing, the good work that's going on, and that way we can voice that, whether it's to other markets or to our consumers.
Thank you for that, Jeff. And you and your team have been great partners, so thank you for that. And I can't help, before we go with Lauren, that I'm still thinking about the McRib and all-day breakfast. I'll just, try to get those two things in there for you. Jeff's like, I hear this from you every time, Brett. Just do it. Just save me once. Lauren, I think about your chair. I think about the organization and the people you represent. Look 3 to 5 years out and talk to us about what you think great collaboration looks like, whether it be amongst the folks that are up here on stage, and or others? And what's your dream, what's your vision, what's your future relative to collaboration in the sustainability space?
Yeah, as the ultimate storyteller, like I want it so that whatever partner we're collaborating with, from the farm all the way to the end user, that every single one feels really good about the pork that we're raising and the food they're eating and their part in that process. And so we mentioned that feed is a large part of our GHG impact, and that's why we've been really strategic in partnership and collaboration with the Minnesota corn growers. If the corn farmer can do well, the pig farmer will do well. And so that's why we start at that level, and we continue to work it up all the way through that supply chain. Because if you caught on a lot of the things that Jeff was sharing, those are the We Care ethical principles. It's literally what we based our sustainability goals and metrics around. That's what they're asking for. And so the more we can plug in information to prove that, the better that they can feel in sharing that product with consumers. And that flows all the way back down to what Kevin can do every day in each one of those areas of principle. And so I think when we can have a story that I say is really compelling, and I can say a majority of Minnesota's pigs are raised in this way and have this impact, like I said, that whole supply chain all the way to the end consumer can feel good about the pork that they're eating, and that's a sustainable business for you. And so I think that's my goal, and that's what I want to do, and I would love to have the proof to do it. So as like the shill for the sustainability reports, please do them. It will only improve the story that I can tell on your behalf. And I really love bringing the proof and the heavy hitter in that report to those meetings, because it really does make an impact.
Thank you, Lauren. And before we go to Dr. Crawford, Kevin said it earlier, and I hope you folks realize you have quite a gem in Lauren sitting up here. She is a talented lady that's passionate about this space and has really grown in the last 4 years, and it's been fun to watch. And I'm not saying it because I'm in Mankato, right? I was in Syracuse Friday, Saturday, Sunday working with their producers in New York, but she is leading in this space, all the 42 state pork associations. And so when you have the opportunity during the conference, please take time and thank for who she is and what she does, because she's doing amazing work. Dr. Crawford, your business is a very crowded space. I remember sitting in the sustainability role at the checkoff, where that was my full-time job all the time. And if you have sustainability in your title, everybody's trying to sell you the next best mousetrap. I'm thinking some of our farmers face that same thing at the farm gate. Think about your business. Think about Sustainable Environmental Consultants 3 to 5 years down the road, and its view of the world in terms of the partnership with pork, what is the flawless protein.
Yes, it is a flawless protein. I think there was a dietitian that said that. I think I agree with that. So for pork producers, data is the ticket to entry for these programs. So whether it's with the NRCS or these climate smart commodity grants from the USDA, working with TNC or others, we work with other NGOs as well. Or again, more coming on talking to lenders because they want to look at their risk management, right? Or talking to insurance because they're trying to understand their risks. Data is the ticket to entry for those. And so getting the baseline report and having the report with the National Pork Board, because your checkoff is funding it. And so you're already paying for it, right, through your checkoff, and this is helping to fund this program. And so it behooves you to understand what your data looks like Kevin's been saying. So prior to this role, I worked at National Pork Board and actually reported to Brett for a number of years. And prior to that role, I actually made product for McDonald's. So I was one of the suppliers and I was responsible for all the raw material, pork and beef, that go into McDonald's, some of the McDonald's products. So I've seen this coming. And so as you think about 3 to 5 years, folks, this, to Jeff's point, we might just be seeing this, but this has been started, and to Brett's point about Project Gigaton, this goes back in time, and I've been watching it coming. And since answering questions, for McDonald's or trying to find this, and for other supplier or other vendors that we were working with, and trying to understand where is this going. And so in the next 3 to 5 years, it's only going to continue to speed up, right? So there's been a lot of change since this administration has come into office presidentially. It's gone really fast, and it's going to get faster, and there's going to be more opportunities. So the program through the National Pork Board, through Minnesota Pork, is really important because it's going to help you understand at the base level what's going on. And also, it's going to help you find that baseline for yourself. Because if you are talking about carbon markets, if you're wanting to look at selling carbon credits, if you're wanting to get into these programs with TNC, you're going to want to have your baseline set before you start doing all these awesome things to continually improve. And so getting that baseline is important. And what I see for us, so we're on 5 of the USDA Climate Smart commodity grants, right? And those are across different commodities. But we're on the one with National Pork Board, and that's really exciting to be able to help you continuously improve. But what I see for us is I'm each week talking to more and more companies at the end of the supply chain, like a McDonald's, but others that are trying to figure it out, and guess where that's going to go? It's going to continue to come back to the farm level. And I'm, SEC, we are from ag, we were founded by agricultural folks, and we're for ag. And so I'm excited in the next 3 to 5 years to continue to help serving producers, for pork producers, absolutely, but anybody in agriculture to help them understand that, and then tie them to these opportunities, whether it's with, like Minnesota Pork, or with TNC, or with McDonald's and others, to help producers realize the value, but also be able to look at those programs and be able to find value from those programs.
Thank you, Sarah. You said something there scary to me at times, is this is coming back to the farm. I think you're right. My challenge to all of us in the room is let us write our own script and our own rule book with our own set of data that is real and justified and science-based, and show them, as opposed to them, if they don't have a playbook to play by, they'll play by their own. And I think we've got tangible examples of that over the course of our industry. It usually doesn't end well for us as pig farmers. And so thank you for that, Sarah. With the time we've got remaining here between, I'm holding you up from lunch, but we've got about 7 minutes remaining. I will turn to the audience, and if any of you have any questions that you would like to ask. And then I'll try to do my best to repeat the question.
Brett, what you were just saying ties into my question. We're waiting on what the Supreme Court has to say about Prop 12. And obviously that's California dictating what the rest of the country has to operate. Is that going to become a moot point because the consumers are going to ask McDonald's, Hardee's, everybody else to say, I want my food in under basically what Prop 12 is asking? It's going to ask for the same things, obviously not a state dictated, but a retailer dictated, and come down to.
So the question was, with the precedent and forthcoming ruling of Proposition 12, take that off the table, but is it a moot point because the end user will decide what they want and what they don't want and how it should or shouldn't be raised? Does that capture the question fairly correctly? And so, Jeff, I'm going to turn to you and through your eyes and lens, how you see this playing out.
Sure. So, certainly that could be the case, right? There's always going to be niche markets where consumers say, this is what I want, and I'm going to pay my dollar for it. From a McDonald's standpoint, and maybe some other retailers, we've long seen that consumers say one thing, but when it comes to pay for it, they do another thing. So, it's a really complicated question, and trust me, we can't wait for the June time to come to when we can find out what the ruling's going to be. But what I could say to you is that McDonald's understands who our customer is. We wouldn't go out and make a decision just because we're getting pressures from NGOs. From that standpoint, our supply chain has to be sustainable. And when you talk about sustainability, it's scale, but it's also bringing food at a competitive cost to folks that want it to feed and foster communities. I hope that answers your question.
In the far back.
Question is for Brett. So the Pork Board, I believe, has received $40 million from the USDA. How is that money going to be targeted and used?
Yeah, thank you for that, Brad. So the question is, the Pork Board has been the recipient of $40 million of climate smart grants. And I'm about arm's length away from it, so I won't be able to get into all the depth and detail. But what I can tell you is that money is geared towards 3 specific states, Minnesota being one, Iowa being another, and Missouri being the third, in which we can drive money back to the farm gate so folks can incorporate practice changes. And so you heard that discussion earlier from the Nature Conservancy, some of the work they're doing, Brad. Very similar. If you're interested in going from conventional tillage to strip till or no till, that costs money. And that costs equipment, and that costs practice change, right? If you're looking to put water meters in your barn, that costs money. If you're looking to shift from fluorescence to LED lights, that costs money. So there's a bunch of tactics and a list of practice change in which if a farmer chooses to do that and implement that, these climate smart grants will drive that money to the farm level.
So, one additional question, as it pertains to what we do as pork producers in Europe, the only agricultural practice that's approved today for carbon sequestration is methane digestion. Who is working on the effort to standardize the carbon sequestration of manure being utilized on our farms?
Yeah, so Brad's comment is if you look at common methodologies and practices approved for carbon capture, methane digesters are on that list today. His question is, who's working on behalf, and I'm going to put my words in here as well, Brad, is what's the common accounting measures to identify carbon capture when utilization of manure? Okay, that's really the core. So I'm going to turn to you, Sara. I'll give my commentary and then turn to you, because here is the confusing space for all of us. Global Reporting Initiative has calculations and ideas about manure emissions, right? There is the STAR method relative to methane emissions and their accounting ideologies. There's Science-Based Target Initiative, which is another accounting methodology relative to how we utilize manure. But the bottom line is, Brad's point is spot on, none of them are feasible, nor accurate, nor appropriate for what pig manure is and how it's handled. And so we are leading some efforts in that space, Brad, with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, as also as the World Economic Forum. But Dr. Crawford, you play in this space of accounting methodologies relative to, let's keep it on pig manure. Tell Brad and team how you are working with experts in the science community and pork board staff to create a methodology that's potentially adopted for carbon capture.
Yeah, so the manure portion, it can be, it's interesting. So there's also one of the accounting or one of the estimates is through the IPCC, and I'm just going to leave it at that acronym, but so you can look them up, IPCC, and they're looking at international, but this is an international body deciding what a manure estimate should be. So if we've got the calculation, right, with all these things, okay, plug in manure, plug in feed, plug, and they say, all right, here's the manure estimate, plug that in. Well, that manure estimate is looking at manure across the globe. And so using the estimate is not ideally what we'd like to do, right, for U.S. production, because we know we utilize manure in a great way and we handle it well. But that's where, for sustainable environmental consultants, we don't want to use the estimate. We want your actual on-farm data about manure components, if you have it, looking at that, looking at the application rates, the methods of application, so that we can get the specific number, because that can really help improve your carbon footprint, the greenhouse gas emissions footprint, by 25 to 40% sometimes we've seen. So it's how do we best get the real data, actual data from the farms, into these equations so that you can get the actual data that's happening and show what manure is actually doing on your farm. Now, as far as improving those equations, or in helping IPCC, for instance, with that, we are in contact and talking to the folks that work on those different methodologies. So talking about GRI or SBTI and others, but even in the United States here especially, working with the academics and talking with the USDA as well and saying, okay, this is what is actually being seen on farm. Because there's a lot of research going on around different land grant institutions here in the United States. And so having those conversations with them, being connected with them, making sure we have the latest and greatest information so that we can best represent you. But that's also why it's so important that we get the data in so that we can then hold it up, kind of like Lauren's saying, right? This is another way to be able to use the data and say, no, this is actually what's happening on pig farms. This is actually what it looks like. So it's going to continue to get better, just as when we look at different models or things like that, that's how it works. And Leif mentioned that earlier too, of getting data in, how do we consider to continue to work that way?
It is a challenge, and I'm a scientist by training, but I'm also a farmer, and I just tell everybody relative to this manure carbon capture, send me the 25-foot Stanley tape measure that we all use on the farm, and let's agree on how it reads and how we measure it, and that is the next step for us, for sure. It's a big challenge. It gets confusing.
Yeah, I have a question. You were talking about how we will look in 5 or forward 3-5 years, and I wonder whether traceability will hinder our capacity to realize all these benefits, because if I do a change and that gets diluted in, let's say, corn that goes to just being corn, am I diluting that benefit that or how do we capture that? Do we need traceability to really go through the supply chain and realize all the benefits that we're putting, the effort that we're putting?
Thank you. So the question is all these things we're talking about, is traceability or the lack thereof in what I'm going to call the grain side of our business a challenge? And potentially on the live production side. So whoever wants to speak to that can, because obviously we're not going to count every kernel of corn and where it comes from. So whoever wants to take a shot.
I'll take the first shot at it. So yeah, traceability certainly is something that has always been a challenge. I think historically McDonald's is, I talked a little bit about enclosing or sheltering our supply chain. That's something that McDonald's has done in the past with other proteins to ensure the traceability piece. And I'm going to talk specifically about our group housing commitment, but that certainly is a challenge. I mean, right now we utilize a consolidated buyer to help us manage all of that. It's a very manual process where they're checking bill of ladings every day to ensure that what's coming in is in fact coming from those types of systems. So I think it is a huge challenge in general, and if somebody has an answer to that, you probably have a multi-million-dollar idea on your hands. But it's certainly a challenge, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to get there. The industry is going to get there.
Leif?
I mean, I and colleagues at TNC, we spend a lot of time talking about this, and I'll tie it more towards the environmental benefit or stewardship behind a product being produced, and in the overall debate between what we would call a mass balance approach. It's like, we know this % of pork was produced eating regeneratively produced corn, right? Versus like, I know that this piece of ham I'm eating was produced or was manufactured in this plant and grown by that hog barn, and the corn was grown by that farmer, right? Like that line of sight. This is great. This is what I think consumer dreams of, but that's expensive. And so I think that the overall debate happening right now is what's that sliding scale look like? What is enough for the consumer? What is enough for the environmental groups? And what is essentially good enough so that we leave as much money for that, like, market premium in theory that's on the table to drive practice change, to send a signal back to the farmer. What I'm getting at here is like the overhead cost of these programs, right? The more detailed and specific and line of sight and all that is means more expensive, means less money getting back to the farmer, which means less of a market driver for change. And so trying to figure out what that middle ground is, what's good enough is we don't have an answer for that right now. So
I will give you a little look under the hood to your question relative to grain traceability. We are currently working with the largest consumer packaged goods company in the world, and for them today, a grain shed area is acceptable. And so, for instance, the river market on the corn side of things or the soybean market, that is good enough for them today. For allied industry partners in the room, I know some of you are connected that you've been able to identify your grain shed area where you think the majority of your product's coming from, and today that plays well. Kevin, I think you had another question up front. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, I'm holding you up for another question. Go ahead.
Canada, we have more than 7,000 small pig farms, little backyard operations, and that's going up and up and up. People want to go back to the land. They may have no background in agriculture, but they just want to raise some pigs. What does that mean here in the U.S.? Is that trend occurring, and what does that mean for sustainability as opposed to working with the bigger producers?
So the question is our friend from Canada says we have 7,000, a little bit of information. Then the question, we have 7,000 what you would categorize as small producers throughout your country, and what impact does that have on sustainability and maybe scaling some of the data in the future strategy relative to sustainability? So, Lauren, let's go through your lens. When I think about Minnesota and the demographics in which the state sees, how do you envision the variable, let's say, production types and systems, not one more important than the other, playing into the overall sustainability strategy as an advantage or as a hindrance?
Yeah, I think it's an advantage because they're either meeting their own needs or the needs of their neighbors or whoever else might be buying pigs for them. And so while their market looks different and who they're selling to might look different, that's a real thing. That's a real sustainability story, their version of it. And so I think we've been pretty deliberate about all sizes, all styles of production, different practices being involved in this work because they're pig farmers, and that's who we're here to talk about and represent through this information. And so there's been show pig growers, there's been other niche production involved in these reports at the national level already, so it's definitely something that, I sometimes will say, like, I want these reports to represent the person that raises 3 pigs or 3 million pigs. And anybody in between should be able to find themselves represented in this work because those are the people that we work for in Minnesota on the national level and even North America. And so I think there's a place for them in this sustainability work. Is it going to be different? Is their report going to look different? Absolutely. But it's their story, and that's important too.
And a point to that as far as the measuring, because we think, well, yeah, but how do you measure if somebody doesn't have a deep pit or a lagoon? We can do that. We've, at Sustainable Environmental Consultants, on the pig side, have worked with everybody, but as we look at agriculture overall, we work with folks on the dairy side that have 10 cows and hand milk and use a manure spreader for their manure, and we can still calculate that information. So nobody's excluded from this, to your point. And yeah, I do think it provides a rich look. And those, to Lauren's point, yeah, those folks are pork producers too. So let's, make sure everybody's included.
Well said by both of you. And the other thing I talk about, depending on to your point about 3 pigs, Lauren, or 3 million, eventually all that pork goes into the food supply chain, period. It will be consumed. And so it doesn't matter if you have 3 pigs or 3 million, you're part of this food system, and you have a responsibility to protect what is not necessarily a right to pig farm, but an honor and a privilege.